It's been 5 whole weeks now since the Feast of Tabernacles. I think a lot of you here were with us at the feast over in Spokane Valley. And if you were there, if you recall the last message that was given on the 8th day, I thought that last message was pretty rousing, and he encouraged us that if we had come to the feast, if we were inspired, that we go back and over the winter, that we act accordingly, that we really do something in our lives with all the time that we have. And so today, what I want to do is plant a seed of action for each and every one of us here, as well as anyone who might be listening online, of course. I want to talk about contributing to the culture in the church of God. And, I'm really excited about what Rob talked about, because Rob really talked about the need to know the doctrinal aspects. And so I'm going to build on that, but in the other realm. And you'll see what I mean as we go along. I'm going to give us just kind of an outline with 6 different factors, different facets that define a culture of an organization. It's not a comprehensive list. It's not in any particular order of importance. They might overlap a little bit, but it's important to know where to kind of file these things. And my assignment that I'm going to give you while you're listening, you might be taking notes, but I want you to think about this as I'm going through each point, is ask yourself, how am I personally contributing? How am I contributing to this aspect in the culture of the church in whatever sphere of influence I have, whether that's in my family, in the congregation, in the organization as a whole? How am I influencing? What is my contribution? Am I building up, or am I letting things fall apart? Again, these are just kind of outline points, nothing too specific. You could take them as a draft, and I'm going to use that word, drafts. So if you're a writer, you might have several drafts. If you're not a writer, maybe you're a sports fan, these are draft picks, drafts, D.R.A.F.T.S. So if you're a note taker, you can write that down. It's an acronym going down the page, D.R.A.F.T.S, drafts. All right, but before we do that, I want to just acknowledge what Rob was talking about, and that is that the culture of the church is built on top of the doctrines of the church. These are the core principles that everything builds on top of. They aren't the same thing as the culture, but they inform what we do with the culture. And Rob had us in Hebrews 5. If we would have just kept reading the next couple verses into Hebrews 6, it talks about the foundational doctrines of the church. Things like repentance, faith in God, baptism, the laying on of hands, the resurrection, judgment. These are the basic doctrines. But the thing is you can correctly believe all of these doctrines, but still not correctly contribute to the culture of the body of the church. And we all want to contribute correctly, don't we? All right, so the first point is D. D is for distinction. Distinction, and I like to think of this as identity. This is embracing the fact that we are distinct, we are different, we are set apart. As most of you probably know, the original word for church in the Greek is ecclesia, and that means to be called out to an assembly, to be called out of what you are doing so that you can go do something else. So if you're here, then that means that God has called you here, and he's taking you out of the world so that you can be here with us in the body, in the church. So let's go ahead and turn to 1 Peter 2, and we'll read verses 9 and 10. 1 Peter 2, verses 9 and 10, where Peter says, "You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light, who were once not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy." You have been called out of the world. I have been called out of the world. Now, do you embrace that? Does that get you excited? If you read over further in 1 Peter, if you read chapter 5, verse 10, he says, "May the God of all grace, who called us to his eternal glory of righteousness." Are you excited that you're going to be part of the eternal glory of God? I have to admit, when I was younger, when I was a teen growing up in the church, I knew I was different. And at that point, I wasn't sure how different I wanted to be. But as an adult, as I've matured, now I am very glad that I'm different. I am very glad that I'm not on the same track as the people out there are on and the people I used to know. It hasn't all been, smooth roads, but our calling as God's people makes us different. Do you embrace that identity? And how do we help each other embrace that identity? All right, so the second one, this is point number 2, the R. Rites, R-I-T-E-S, as in rituals. This is doing special things as a group, like rites of passage. All strong institutions have ceremonies and traditions that they do together, that they repeat over and over again. Now, of course, we've got lots of these in the church. Of course, you've got baptism. Of course, that's kind of a personal thing. You only do it once. But then we've got the weekly Sabbath that we do every week. And we've got the holy days that we cycle through year after year after year, building up bricks in the wall. And then even on top of that, we have things because most of us live quite a distance from each other. It's not, some of us are lucky enough to have next door neighbors who are in the church. That's a blessing. So that we create other rites. Summer camp, winter camp, men's hikes, women's retreats, potlucks, game nights, trivia nights. The list goes on, and those are great things that we should be doing. Turn to a couple scriptures real quick. Hebrews 10:25. Hebrews 10:25 says that we should not forsake the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhort one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. We get something very similar to that in Philippians chapter 1, verse 27. Philippians 1:27 says, "Only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel." We're supposed to be assembling together. We're supposed to be striving together. We're supposed to be building bonds of community by doing things together. So I've got to ask myself, how am I doing with this, of building these bonds in the body? All right. The third letter, A. A is for assurance. A is for assurance, and I like to think of this as confidence. This is believing in the effectiveness and the abilities of the group. Now, I said confidence. Does this mean that we have confidence in man? No, it actually means just the opposite. Why? Because of point number 1. What are we? We are called out. By whom? Who called us here? If God called us out to put us here for a reason, then our confidence is in the fact that he knew what he was doing when he put us here, right? And if we're still here in Philippians, we're going to read more in Philippians because Paul talks about this. Philippians chapter 1, starting verse 3, where he's telling them, this congregation, I thank my God upon every remembrance of you always, and in every prayer of mine, making request for you all with joy, for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now. Being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. Paul was saying that he was confident in the fact that God would work with them. And everyone knows, I'm a work in progress. You're a work in progress. But I have confidence that God can get me to where I need to be when I need to be there. So I can have confidence that he'll do the same thing for each and every one of you. And we can have confidence that he can get the church ready for whatever we need to do when he needs us to do it. So do we have confidence in one another that we can learn, that we can grow? Do we have confidence that God is leading us all and we're all in this together? How do we show that? How do we build that up? Again, it's different for each one of us, but I just want to plant that thought. The next one, F, the letter F, form. Form. This is adopting signs that show we belong to the group. You might think of this as the image. Groups tend to have signs or flags or banners or something like that. Of course, each state, each country has a flag. We've got a seal. It's right here, right? And that's somewhat important, that we all have a physical logo. Some groups have physical signs like uniforms. You can tell a police officer, someone in military by just the uniform that they wear. And we have a dress code when we come to church, right? We dress nice. You don't have to have a tie unless you're speaking, but and that's important too, But what is a more important thing that we are supposed to wear, that we are supposed to put on like it's a uniform? Something that others can see about us. Let's go to Colossians. If we're still in Philippians, it's going to be a couple pages over for you. Colossians is a hard one to find sometimes. It's easy to flip past. Colossians chapter 3. And we'll read verses 12 through 15. Colossians 3, starting verse 12. And Paul says, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on, like it's the clothes you wear, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another and forgiving one another, if anyone has a complaint against another. Even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. But above all these things, put on love, which is the bond of perfection, and let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to which also you are called in one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. If you were on one of these reality TV shows and they were following you around with a camera everywhere you went. If someone spent that kind of time with you, what impression would they get of you? Would they get the impression that you're merciful, that you're kind, humble? If they spent time with me, would they see that I am teachable, that I am patient, that I'm willing to forgive? Am I loving? Am I thankful? Again, we should wear these things like a uniform that people can see wherever we go. They spend more than just a few seconds with you. They should see that this is the way that you are. My grandpa told a story about when he was in the service, that there was one guy in his group named Rennekamp. And they always knew where he was because he never took his big trench coat off. He'd throw it on over his backpack and everything, and they'd be like, oh, there he comes. Does he ever take that thing off? And they'd joke, they'd make light of it. I bet he even showers in that thing, because they never saw him take it off. But we should be like that. We should be like that. Oh, you're always kind. You're always forgiving. You're always willing to do the right thing. We should put that on like a uniform every day that we wake up. All right, moving on. T in drafts. T is for tradition. Tradition. Or I like to think of this as a legacy. This is understanding that we are rooted in a tradition stretching back in time. It's not just us here. It's not just now. This isn't something new. This is a way of life that we've inherited from those that came before us. Some of us, it was literally our parents who brought us up in the church. Or maybe it's from spiritual parents or godparents as we come in and learn these things for the first time. People who are role models to us later in life. But it's not just them. This goes back. It goes further and further back. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 11. Where it talks about people of faith down through time. And we'll jump in verse 32. Hebrews 11, verse 32. Where it says, "What more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trials of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves of the earth, and all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. Not yet. They're waiting. God having provided something better for them? No, us. Having provided something better for us. We are part of that group. That's a really high bar. That is kind of intimidating when you think about it. But going back to point number one, that's what you were called for. And we keep reading in Hebrews. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. We are part of that tradition. And it's our job to pass that on to those who come after us as well, to our kids. How are we doing? Is it deliberate? Or is it something we hope they just kind of soak up? He's a smart kid. I'm sure he'll figure it out. Again, it's a high bar. How are we doing? All right, and then the last one. S is for speech. Speaking in such a way that shows that we are part of the group. Just like with form, there's a sort of surface level to this, and then there's a deeper level that we need to get to. At the surface level, we have kind of church speak, this jargon that we use. Hey, happy Sabbath, how was your feast? Or maybe if you're young, you're a camper. Did you get in the zone? Isn't it good to be in the zone? You know, and it's good to have these things that we can have a common language. We know what we're talking about, but they're not as important as the deeper level. In Colossians 4, verse 6, it says that our words should always be with grace. And what does grace mean? Grace means a gift. Are our words gifts to one another? Again, think about if someone were to follow you around, what are they going to see day in and day out when they really get to know you? We're told in the scriptures about our words, we're told to speak the truth. We're told to speak comfort, words of faith. We're told to edify, to build each other up. If someone followed you around and recorded everything that you say, are your words helpful? Do they help or do they hurt? Do we compliment or do we constantly complain? And do we comfort each other? Are we using words of life or strife? Again, this is something I've got to ask myself, and something that we've all got. We have to think about these things day in and day out. All right, so in case you missed it, that was drafts. D was distinction. R was rights. A was assurance. F was form. T was tradition. And S is speech. I'm a note taker. I like when, I missed that one. Oh, good, he mentioned it again. Strong and resilient groups and organizations cultivate these sorts of things to make strong and resilient people. They foster a sense of belonging, of cohesion in the group. Because we're a family. We're a family here. So I'm going to give you some homework. I used to be a teacher. Spend some time this week thinking about these things when you got a little bit of quiet time and you can just let your mind think. How do I contribute? What have I done in the past? How can I improve that maybe going forward? What's my place and how can we make it a better place?